is the Happy Scientist Podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happyscientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Happy Scientist Podcast. This is the place to be if you want to become a happier, healthier and more productive scientist. I'm Nick Oswald, the founder of bitesizebio.com, and today we will be drawing on the wisdom of Mr. Kenneth Vogt, the Bitesize Bio team coach and the founder of the executive mentoring company Vera Claritas. Today, and in all other Happy Scientist podcast episodes, you get to benefit from Ken's Yoda-like words of wisdom to help you increase your performance, enjoyment, and success in the lab. And today, we will be discussing how to reason with the unreasonable. Okay, Ken, take it away.
Okay. So, I'm sure you've encountered plenty of people that you needed to reason with. It's got to be a big part of the job, and sometimes it involves explaining things that are hard to understand, or sometimes it's things that are not popularly understood, and maybe you have to convince people of things that they wouldn't normally be open to, and so you encounter all kinds of different reactions to that, and I'm going to break it down into three different possibilities. Now the title was How to Reason with the Unreasonable, but that's just one type. The fact is you have to know how to reason with people who are reasonable also, if you intend to succeed at it. Then there's the probably next largest group, or the unreasonable, or maybe they're the largest depending on your environment. But there's a third group that I'll call the unreasoning. So it's a little different than the unreasonable, and we'll break that down as to why that is. And there's a way to deal with all of them. So, not to despair. You may sometimes feel like the only way you can be successful is with reasonable people, and that's not true. You can get places with people that are unreasonable and even unreasoning, so long as you approach them in the right way. So, Let's begin with talking about the reasonable. So, some of this may seem kind of obvious, but if you don't put it into practice, even reasonable people will not come along with whatever you're trying to present. So it begins with, you got to detail the facts. Reasonable people care about facts. They care about what's true, what's demonstrable, what's evident. So you got to give that to them. And you need to use deductive reasoning. And when I say deductive reasoning, think Sherlock Holmes. The idea is, there's this, therefore there's that. And I love something that is ascribed to Arthur Conan Doyle, speaking in the voice of Sherlock Holmes, that when you have examined all the possibilities and whatever is left after you've discarded all the ones that are impossible, however improbable, must be the correct position. Now, I realize that was dreadfully paraphrased, but that's the point. Sometimes it's the conclusions you draw from the facts that are even more important, and they will be very important to reasonable people, especially if you've established that you are reasonable and that you're someone who reasons, who uses their thinking apparatus. Now, another thing you have to do, too, in these situations is more than just lay out the facts. You actually have to speak out loud the conclusions you've drawn. You might look at it and say, well, anybody would figure that out. Yeah, maybe not. Give yourself some credit for being smart and give people a chance to catch up and not have to jump through the hoops you got to get to your end conclusions. So share your conclusions and show your work, as it were. Give them the backup for those conclusions. You're also allowed to appeal to authority. And when I say authority, I don't mean authority like who's in charge. I mean authority like authority in the knowledge space. So If something's already been well established by people who have been very reasonable and dug in deep, by all means, reference that authority. So you don't have to ignore everything that went before you. You can stand on the shoulders of giants. And finally, when you're talking to somebody reasonable, try to draw out their curiosity. Get them engaged in what you got interested in. That'll help bring them forward. And maybe they will draw some further conclusions that will be even more beneficial than the ones you've already got to. And maybe they can then reason with you. So it's good for you. So Nick, do you encounter a lot of reasonable people in the lab?
Yeah, you would hope so. It's an interesting one. This actually, the way that you and maybe this is just one side of how you're looking at it, and I'm just trying to check whether I'm going to just. No, I don't think I am. I'm going to give away what you're about to say anyway. But the one thing that I think what you said, it all makes perfect sense. It's all very reasonable. One thing is that you're starting off by assuming that you are right, though.
That's true.
That's what it sounds like. And so my sort of like slight addendum to this would be as in reasoning with any of these people, you have to be willing to listen as well to their side of the equation, sort of thing. If it's because even I've seen in science and elsewhere, even people who are experts in the same thing, they have looked at the same facts and they've come up with different conclusions, and they'll belligerently argue the point and not listen to each other. And again, a lot of the problems that you see in the world are people not listening to each other, and whether one is right or one is wrong, it matters, but it also matters that you listen and respect each other, because when you lose respect, things start to disintegrate.
Right. And you cut yourself off from a lot of useful input too, then. Things that could make your position stronger.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just wrote down a couple of things here that, you have the facts and you reach conclusions from the facts. Again, as scientists, you're always battling against the fact that your beliefs cloud how you convert the facts into conclusions, your opinions, who you listen to in the world, and so on. And again,
and those are required things, because we couldn't get through life if we didn't do that.
Exactly. But the danger is that I hope I'm not derailing the whole subject here, but the danger is that not to use reason to create division.
Right. Well, when I wrap up, we're going to come back to this.
I knew you would have done that. Yeah. Okay.
So it's all right. No, you didn't give anything away that shouldn't be given away, and you've opened the door. So everybody, keep listening. There's more coming. So let's go to the next group. Now, I say the next group of people. I want to be clear here. Any individual can, in the moment, be reasonable or unreasonable or unreasoning. So it isn't like, this person is reasonable, therefore I'm going to do this. Maybe on this particular topic, they're unreasonable. They've got deep opinions or beliefs about it, or it triggers them in some way that, you may not even know why, but it does. So it isn't a matter of pasting somebody as this person is unreasonable. Well, just in this setting, if they're demonstrating to you that they are unreasonable in this particular conversation, well, then you're going to have to switch up your tactics a bit. So the first thing you have to do with somebody that you consider to be unreasonable, and remember, this is very much a value judgment, the first thing you have to do is you have to be open-minded. They have a different position than you. That's obvious. So you want to hear what it is. You want to do your best to understand it. Because even if you completely don't agree, even if they're just totally off their rocker as far as you're concerned, you want to know how they're off their rocker. You want to you want to understand how they got there. Then once you've got some semblance of understanding of where they are, no matter how much you disagree with it, then the thing you got to do is you got to search for some common ground. And chances are there is some, if you're willing to see it. Now, if you're just gonna paste them as unreasonable, and I just don't want to engage with that, I don't want to deal with that, well, you're not going to get very far. But if they feel really off the reservation from your viewpoint, if you can find some things you have in common, well, now you got a place to start. And you can reference those things. You can go to those things. And now, instead of just, here's the facts and here's the obvious conclusion, you start with a proposition as a possibility. So I've considered these facts as a possibility, and I've considered this outcome as a result. And you're not presenting it as the one and only truth. You're not claiming that you have the absolute perfect vision of what it all is. You're just saying, well, this is what it looks like from this position. If we agree on these facts, and if we agree that this is a reasonable position to draw from those facts, this is where we would end up right now. But what do you think? And again, it's like what Nick was talking about earlier. You got to be open-minded, and you got to listen. You got to hear what they have to say. Because a lot of times, what you're considering to be unreasonable is in reference to the facts you possess. But it is quite possible they have additional facts that you aren't yet aware of. Now, when you add those facts in, all of a sudden what sounded unreasonable a moment ago can change to being completely reasonable. Now, I'm not talking about the nut job thing of the idea of alternative facts. The facts are facts. The alternative fact as a phrase is an oxymoron. But often there is more to a picture than what we ourselves see. And
see, yeah. Here's another way to look at this though as well. So in science, this one works as well. Is that now? Let's see. Make sure I get this right. So you're talking about. So I'm coming from a position of I have facts that I'm basing my conclusion on, and the other person disagrees, and that person may or may not have facts that mean that they that are driving that disagreement. If I was back in the 90s and I was saying I would be saying, from what we know, the regions on the genome between genes are junk DNA.
Right.
Okay. And that there were no facts. Well, there probably were threads of facts assembling that sort of voided that conclusion. But you wouldn't be able to give a definitive definitive counter to that, apart from the fact that, again, that thing that I mentioned before is that, as you know, from as far as we can tell so far, with the data we have so far, this is what it looks like. This is this is what it is, and I think that's something that that happens quite a lot, is that we harden those into facts, into laws, rather than being the latest best opinion based on the facts that we have so far.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's a trap we fall into a lot in science, where we harden that into something and then we make everyone else unreasonable because that's extreme cases. But you always have to be aware that those edges of the scientific knowledge, the leading edge is always quite soft, I think.
Right. Well, and I'm using the word facts somewhat loosely. I mean, there's such a thing as data. Now, data is just black and white, but data is also, very sterile. We have to turn data into information, and perhaps we turn information into facts. So it's several steps down the line.
The semantics are important though, because you're saying, we talk about as soon as you convince yourself you're talking about facts, you use the word facts, you convince yourself, it's easy to convince yourself that this is factual. It's not just the latest information that we have. And then you talk about this person being unreasonable because they don't accept the fact, when really the more accurate description is they seem unreasonable to me from this position, right? And then it's a small step to start, calling them stupid, giving them labels, making it so that their opinion is so devalued that it's never worth listening to them again. And then you just start creating rifts. Anyway, I'm saying the same thing again, but.
Well, I would like to point out this particular conversation. This is a good example of this. You basically listened to what I had to say and then felt it is unreasonable to describe facts this way, and you gave your case for it, and then I elucidated a bit more about what I meant by facts, and so we're having a reasonable conversation as a result, even though you might have found some of my statements to be less than perfectly reasonable. That's awesome. That's what we want, and that's what we have to have.
But the thread of the angle I'm coming at is that the ingredient that can never be missing here is respect. And you mentioned finding common ground. Well, if nothing else, you're both human beings. So
sure, yeah, yeah. I would imagine in most cases in the lab that you've got lots of common ground. I mean, you probably don't have too many people that you think are just absolutely enemies out there.
No. Although there are quite, you do get the head-to-heads.
Well, there's nothing wrong with spirited debate. As long as you say, you stick to being respectful at the end of the day. Like it's like when you watch two fighters get into a boxing ring who are actually friends. When they're in a boxing ring, though, they're having a boxing match. But afterward, there's a hug and a handshake.
Yeah, I think I'm commenting because I've seen it go to the extreme of that guy's an idiot. I'm never listening to him again.
Yeah,
that's hardly an argument, is it?
Yeah, exactly. That's if you're going there, your argument is very weak. Yeah.
Well, you miss out on the possibility, because what if this person comes up with some really great, data that adds to what you're both studying? Because generally it'll be you're both studying the same thing or whatever. And yeah.
So there you go. So I want to add one other flavor to this on top of the idea of respect, and that is when you're talking to someone where you feel like they're being a bit unreasonable, and you can't really appeal to them based on facts any further than you already have. Well, you can appeal to honor, and that brings them back to for the sake of our lab, for the sake of our field, for the sake of science, that, please engage with me. Please listen. And I want to be clear here. This is very different than trying to shame somebody into it. You're not trying to say, if you don't act honorably, then you're a scumbag. That's not the point. We want to, you're going to catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. So, go with the things that work.
Yeah, it's like agreeing to the rules of the game. It's like, for the sake of boxing, don't kick me in the nether regions. You know what I mean? Because
exactly.
Then the game stops being the game.
All right. So then to the third group, and this one I hope you don't encounter this too often in your field, but I'm sure it happens, and it definitely happens in your life. And that is when you encounter the unreasoning. People that are not using their power of reason. Well, that's because they're being motivated by something else, and that something else is probably emotion. So with somebody who's unreasoning, what you got to do with them is you got to uncover what is the emotion behind what's driving them. Where is it coming from? Why are they being this way? Why are they not willing to hear what you have to offer? So once you've uncovered the emotion, it's important that you acknowledge the emotion. You got to make it clear that, look, I'm not making you a bad guy because you're coming from fear, or you're coming from feeling disrespected, or you're coming from anger, or whatever the emotion may be. If you acknowledge the emotion, it's understandable that based on your experience that you would feel that way. It's not a hard thing to say. That's never, I don't care how crazy they are seeming to you. You can look somebody in the eye and sincerely say to them, if I were you, I'm sure I would see it that way myself. Well, you're not them, so don't worry about it. It's not going to get on you. You're not going to get dirty here. Yeah, but if they're really coming from a place where they're totally unreasoning and totally emotionally driven, then acknowledge that. Oftentimes, people that operate that way in this moment, that's a big pattern in their life. And it's a part of their life that they think is right, that they think is correct. And they may be getting a lot of pushback from a lot of directions because of it. So to have somebody acknowledge it, it's not about validation here, just acknowledging it. I hear you. I hear what you are saying, and I understand that it's coming from this. That is very powerful. The next thing you can do with somebody like that, then, is start speaking to them in their own language. If you find them using phrases or using certain words to describe certain things, start joining them in that. And if you insist on your language, when somebody's being emotional, forget it. They're never coming along. So, it's really powerful to use their language. Language is a very, it's a very strong thing in human experience. And, it's fairly unique to us. There's some argument that there's some animals that have a certain amount of language, but no animal's got language like humans. And this language has done a lot for building us into what we are and creating our cultures and creating the scientific advancement that we have. So use that language and use it to your advantage. The next thing you have to do is, they've probably have revealed that they've got some kind of framework that they're seeing the world in. Well, stay in their framework. When you step outside of it, they're going to have a hard time again. They're going to go back to emotional responses. But if you can isolate that framework of how they see the world and speak to them in that framework, now you've got some handles where you can get somewhere with them. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that you're not doing this to validate them, and validation is a very slippery slope, and it's become very popular in some cultural settings these days that people need their feelings validated. Well, some feelings are not valid. Not by any regular definition of that word valid. Now, we're not saying that somebody's perspective is wrong because, no, everybody has a perspective. It comes from a unique place. But it isn't about saying that their perspective is the truth. And when you start joining into that, especially if you're doing it insincerely, you're not gonna make your case. You're not gonna sway people to your way of thinking, at least not for long. They're gonna feel tricked. They're gonna feel manipulated, and that never turns out well. And that's the other slippery slope there: manipulation. You're not in things to win arguments, or that's not the point. We should be seeking the highest truth that we can come up with. I mean, science is all about that which we can validly demonstrate. Well, let's stick to that. Let's not make it about, well, I'm clever so I can win the argument. And because clever is not the same as intelligent. In fact, it rather has a devious overtone to it.
Did you hear there was a survey published here in the UK this week where they were trying to remove the perceived barrier to people going to be rocket scientists and neuroscientists. It's not rocket science.
Mm-hmm.
And they did tests on all sorts of tests on a group of neuroscientists, a group of rocket scientists, and different groups of members of the public. And while the skill sets were different. The neuroscientists were better at making fast decisions than the average person on the street, and so on. The overall level of intelligence was the same in the different groups. It was quite an interesting study. So there's different, there's just highlights the difference between clever intelligence and training and skill sets. So.
Sure. Yeah, and we've talked before about being arrogant and how damaging it can be. And if you're dealing with somebody that's unreasoning, being arrogant is really not going to work. It's not going to help. And even if if you win the argument, well, you win the battle, but you lose the war, and it's not worth it. Now, there's two articles we'll have in the show notes that may be worth looking at. One is entitled "How to Escape the Trap of Reason," because reason it only gets you so far, as we've discussed. And the second one is "You Can't Think Your Way Out of This." And that one is talking about people that rely deeply on reason. And I want to point out here, reasonable, unreasonable, and unreasoning, this applies to you too.
Oh God.
Yeah, might be hard to hear for some. But the fact is, all of us do all three of these things. Now, the sad part is, if we spend most of our time being unreasonable, or worse yet, unreasoning, well, we're wasting a lot of potential skill there. And I think that might go back to your survey. If you've got these training and skill sets, but you're not using them, what a shame that is. What a loss it is for your field and for humanity. So we want to be as reasonable as we possibly can. But we don't want to become such a stick in the mud that we can't be open-minded. Sometimes being unreasonable on purpose is useful. It's like, what if we just...
That devil's advocate.
Yeah, what if we just, what? There's no reason to doubt it, but maybe that isn't junk DNA there after all. Well, that's how this got found out, that it's not so simple.
So one other thing that kind of occurs to me is it's important to be aware that there's an edge of reason where it's not beyond reason, where a reasonable argument doesn't work anymore. And one example I was thinking of, just to use a historical one, because then it's a bit less less emotional, is back in, say, the early 2000s, when we started when stem cells started coming into their own. And the way that the only way we were able to get stem cells was to harvest them from embryos, or embryos that were that had been aborted. And so the reasonable argument was, we can do this research, we can work on these cells, and then we can use them to cure diseases and so on. And there was no, we can make stem cells from other cells, so we don't need to harvest them from embryos. So a big chunk of this, the opposition to this is gone now. But at that point, there was an argument about, that's all very reasonable. We can do that. We could cure children of all sorts of diseases, and people of all sorts of diseases. But the whole idea, for some people, the whole idea of using these aborted embryos as a source for these stem cells was so in opposition to their worldview that it didn't matter what the reasonable argument was, they couldn't accept it. And then so as a scientist, it's tempting to just drive home the benefits argument more and more. But that you're talking a different language. So this is where the integration of science into society becomes delicate and not just about reason, and it has to be respected, I think. I think that's one one position that I've seen, and I used to be very arrogant and take this sort of thing where it's like, if I can argue the benefit, then all I have to do is argue that benefit louder, and you have to listen to me because I'm right. But the reality is much more nuanced. You know, that the
Well,
whole
I love what you just said there. This is, you have to listen to me because I'm right. That is so not true.
well, yeah. However, the idea, I was right in one way. That, you know, if I'm taking that side of the argument of, we can use this technology to save people's lives and make their lives better. That's correct, right? But
Yeah. Oh, I don't disagree that with the statement. You can be 100% right, and it still doesn't require them to listen to you.
yeah, yeah, and the whole you know, around that time, the whole idea of science communication was becoming more and more more and more of a thing. People were becoming more and more of the need for it, and I think I hope it's getting better. But at that time, it did seem to me anyway, and maybe that's just because that's who of the way that I saw things. At that time, science communication was more about bludgeoning. It became a little bit about bludgeoning people with these ideas and taking someone with, you know, who has an unreasonable, in quotes, as a non-reason based argument against the reasoned argument, and saying that the reasoned argument should win just because it was reasoned. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, because that's the assumption then, is that there is no higher way of assessing something than to reason on it.
Yeah.
And that's not true. And
Yeah.
I realize for a lot of people that is a disturbing statement. But reason is just a foundation. It's not the end all be all. There's more. And the emotional nature of humans is highly valuable. So, you know, let's not forget to engage it.
And the way to see it is that you, regardless of who you are, you have an edge where you don't think reason, you know, where you're not prepared to go any further. You see what I mean? Where, like, for example, you know, human cloning, that can be done, and it would potentially have benefits, I presume, but I would think it'd be very difficult to find people who wanted to do that.
Well, and thus there is such a thing as ethics in science, you know?
Well, this is what I mean. Yeah, this is
and it becomes, it's ethics. A whole field now, too.
Ethics is really where science starts bleeding out into the non-reasonable and into the, I'm not an expert in this, but this is the way that I see it. So.
Well, it's like what you were talking about earlier, that it's not just about communication among scientists. You're communicating with non-scientists too, and it matters that you communicate with non-scientists. It's the world is being benefited by scientists who are willing to bring things down to a level that the non-scientists can understand. It's expanding humanity to do so. Yeah. So it's a wonderful
However,
thing.
the trap is, and again, this is always acknowledged when you do scientific communication training. I think this is just a good angle on it, is that the trap is to when you start becoming top down, when you think you're preaching to people about the way it should be, instead of offering here's a potential tool that society at large can use. Rather than trying to just bludgeon it in because you think it should be there, if you see what I mean.
Well, I was thinking about if you were a scientist that helped create medical devices, for instance. You don't look at doctors like they're too stupid to understand. You do have a different skill set, though. You know, so you realize, well, I got to communicate in such a way that a doctor will understand how this will be useful to them. Excellent. Well, if you can do that with a doctor, you can do that with anybody. You can do that with, you know, a high school student. You know, I was seeking an example of something that nobody's going to be offended, you know. But, okay, you know, there are people that are less educated than you in the world on your topic. Great. Figure out a way to communicate with them. And this approach when it comes to reasonableness is one way of looking at it.
Well, that was an interesting one.
Yeah.
So, thank you again, Ken, for another. That was a really great topic. Again, you know how to get things going, don't you?
Well, I love the way you got engaged with it too.
So that just leaves me to mention, though, that if you want to see any more of our episodes, they are all at bitesizebio.com/the happy scientist. And just as importantly, if you want to tell me I was all wrong there, that's fine. That could be correct as well. We are at facebook.com/the happy scientist club, and you can feel free to contact us or just join us up and look at what we're doing there. And yeah, it'd be good to see you there. So until that just leaves us to say goodbye until the next episode. So again, thanks, Ken. And
Thank
we'll
you.
see you for the next one.
Very good.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.